Friday edition of Pro Football Talk PM, and there's Carson Wentz arriving in Indianapolis, presumably for his physical. He's allowed to communicate with the Colts. He's not a member of the Colts until March 17 officially, but as a practical matter, he is a Colt traded by the Eagles. The paperwork goes through in 3 weeks and 5 days. That was the big story from Thursday, and it resonates in today because it's otherwise kind of slow. So thank you, Eagles and Colts, for the gift that keeps on giving. Thank you, Peter King, for joining us on this Friday edition of PFTPM on Peacock and Sirius XM 211. Peter, what was your first reaction when you saw that the deal was done? Because you and I had both kind of come to an agreement, understanding, consensus that there was no rush. 2 days later, they did the deal.
Right. Well, I think what happened, if I'm reading the tea leaves, is that Chris Ballard was the only fish in the sea, the Indianapolis general manager. Whether he had no offer whatsoever from the Chicago Bears or whether he had given the Bears an opportunity to make an offer and they either didn't make one or they were just sort of feeling each other out. Howie Roseman, the general manager of the Eagles, knew that he only had one serious contender for the services of Carson Wentz. And if I am guessing, I'm guessing that Chris Ballard, the general manager of the Colts, basically said, listen, we're not in this forever, by the way. I firmly believe they would have been serious contenders for Sam Darnold. So I think basically Howie Roseman probably came to his senses. And he said the realistic selling price for this player cannot be a rock-solid first-round draft choice. It just can't be. You can't expect that the guy who's the 35th rated quarterback in the NFL in 2020, out of 36, by the way, you can't expect that guy would fetch a first-round pick in return because nobody knows right now what Carson Wentz is. This is a leap of faith trade for the Colts with justification, and this is, we got to get this guy out of here by the Eagles.
You mentioned the possibility of the Colts pivoting to Sam Darnold. That would have been fascinating because it was the Colts and the Jets that did the trade 3 years ago that allowed the Jets to come up and get Sam Darnold. So there would have been a nice little symmetry to Darnold ending up with the Colts. But I'm with you. I think Chris Ballard convinced Howie Roseman, this is it. And it's not getting any better. In fact, it could get worse. In fact, it could go away altogether. You better jump now. We're not going to sit here and stare at you for another 3 weeks and go through the motions. We have other plans to make. We need to know whether or not there's going to be $25.4 million in cash and cap space this year on our books for Carson Wentz so we can make our other plans. We've got other players we need to address, whether they're with us or not with us, and we want to put this to bed, and this is what we're offering, and who knows? Maybe he put an articulated specific deadline on when that offer was going away, but either way, they got it done, and you're right. It was always the Colts. It was only the Colts. No one else was going to jump in unless they thought Carson Wentz was going to want to go there. And, Peter, the other angle to this, too, Miles Simmons and I were talking about this earlier today. When you've got Frank Reich, who knows Carson Wentz extremely well from being the offensive coordinator in Philadelphia, you've got somebody who's in a position to find out exactly what went wrong last year. And you may not get the answer with 100% clarity, but at least you get a pretty damn good idea, a far better idea than we have on the outside. We just look at it and say, I don't know what the hell went wrong. It just went wrong. But between Wentz's performance slipping, the issues with the offensive line, these interpersonal problems between Doug Pederson and Carson Wentz, Adam Schefter pointed out earlier today on 97 The Fan Fanatic in Philly, they didn't talk for 8, 9, or 10 weeks. How ridiculous is that? But Frank Reich's in the unique position to figure out what happened and to figure out whether or not it was an aberration. Clearly, they were willing to bet on it being an aberration, and they're one of the only teams that can get the full picture, or at least to this, as close to the full picture as possible.
The one thing that really occurs to me, after I sat down last night and analyzed this a bit, Mike, just think about this for a second. Here's what the Indianapolis Colts have traded. They've traded the 84th pick in the draft this year, okay? And then they've traded either, and look, let's guess. They've traded either the 55th or the 24th pick next year. And the Colts, by the way, have a way to control that if they want to. They can attempt anyway. It'd be very easy to control this, by the way, if Carson Wentz misses 2 or 3 games with an injury, even if he's playing well. You can find some snaps if you want to and maybe get him down to 70%. I'm not saying that they're gonna try to do that, but let's just say it's a 1 next year because that's likely what it'd be in 2022. If you get your long-term starting quarterback on your cap for the next 4 years at an average of about $24 million, and you pay the 84th and 25th picks in the draft for your long-term quarterback, who's still in his 20s, you've made a very good deal. Now, Carson Wentz now has to fulfill his end. He's got to be the long-term quarterback. That's the big question.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And, again, we don't know what happened, and we'll only know where it goes from here. The Eagles did have confidence that this was an aberration and it's something that would fix. And, look, they weren't exactly selling the guy at a high point. They were coming off of a very bad season, a very bad relationship. They had to move on, and they did move on. What else do you think the Colts need to do now that they know who their quarterback's going to be?
Well, the Colts are in their 15th day of draft meetings today. They're setting their draft board, as we sit here right now. And I think what you're going to see the Colts do right now is address some of the issues that they feel they need to address for the long term, okay? And a couple of those things, I really feel like they are going to be cognizant of their cornerback situation. I think they're okay with their front seven right now, but I think they really feel like they need to address their cornerback situation. And I think that they would also like to find another Zach Ertz type player. And how ironic would it be if that Zach Ertz type player is Zach Ertz? Because I think we all believe that the Eagles most likely, because of cap reasons some, and because of other reasons too, I think that the Colts, or I think the Eagles, at the end of the day, likely are going to part ways with Zach Ertz, either in a trade or however. But I think the other question there is, would Frank Reich, who is, along with Mike Groh, designed the winning play in the Super Bowl 4 years ago this month, Carson Wentz to Zach Ertz, would they have enough faith if he's out on the free market to go get him? That is going to be fascinating to me. But that's the other thing. I think needs a regular security blanket, sort of a long-term guy. But could they get a quick fix, in Zach Ertz? They could.
And another guy who was let go today by the Eagles, Deshaun Jackson. The last time we saw him performing at an extremely high level was week 1 of the 2019 season when the Eagles were down 17-0 against Washington. Deshaun Jackson and Carson Wentz connected repeatedly, a couple of long touchdowns for Deshaun Jackson that sparked the Eagles to the come-from-behind win. They could use a guy who would stretch the field deep, and Deshaun Jackson, even though he's been around for a while, can still run. He just can't stay healthy. But maybe multiple Eagles will be making their trek to Indianapolis from Philly as the Colts try to get over the hump. They're in the conversation. The question is, how far will they take it with Carson Wentz? And when you look at what they're going to spend, and when you look at where the market currently is, if they keep him for all 4 years, it's right around $100 million for 4 years. That's $25 million a year. Right. That's nothing. That's nothing now. That's $20 million below the top of the market in Patrick Mahomes. So this is a great deal. And they're only really tied in for 2 years because next year's $22 million payout has $15 million fully guaranteed as of March 19th. So you're in for 2 years, and then you can keep him for the final 2 at $51 million, which really isn't all that much and won't be all that much 2 years from now. And if they really like what he's done the first 2 years, I wouldn't be surprised if they rip up those last 2 years and give him a new deal if they are where they hope they'll be now that they've completed, they hope, this process from Andrew Luck to Jacoby Brissett to Phillip Rivers to Carson Wentz.
You know what is really amazing, and you just said it, Mike. I mean, think about how much money they have spent on quarterbacks. I mean, you go back to 2018, and you know, obviously 2018, you've got a full year of Andrew Luck is your guy of the future, and then 2019 until late August, that Saturday night, you realize that, oh my gosh, we got to find another quarterback. But you remember, Jimmy Irsay did not make Andrew Luck pay back the $12 million in bonuses that he got in 2019. So you've got Andrew Luck with $12 million. You've got Jacoby Brissett with what was it, like $17 million or whatever it was. But you pay your quarterbacks $32 million because you also had Brian Hoyer in 2019. And then in 2020, you get Phillip Rivers and you're still paying Jacoby Brissett. So you're well over $30 million again in 2020. And now this year, I guess you're going to be Wentz, Eason, and likely one veteran cast-off somewhere. I doubt it would be a Fitzmagic type guy, but, some veteran guy at $3 or $4 million, you're going to be over $30 million again. And, deep down, you're not positive that you got the long-term guy. So, the Colts have made an awful lot of major investments at the quarterback position. It's interesting to see if they finally got the one who they want long-term this year.
And, Peter, they better have someone they feel good about as the backup to Carson Wentz because he has an extended injury history. So I don't know that Eason is enough, and I doubt that they'd bring Nick Foles to Indianapolis, although that would make for one hell of a story if Wentz and Foles were back together again with Frank Reich as the head coach. But they've got to have somebody. They've got to have somebody. And I think that's one of the reasons why that threshold's in there, that playing time threshold. It's not just the possibility he gets benched. It's the possibility he physically can't complete the season. That keeps that pick at a second-rounder for the Indianapolis Colts. And speaking of second quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts may still be the second quarterback in Philadelphia. All we know is the Eagles highly value their number 2 quarterback, whoever it is. My understanding, they view it as a top 15 roster position. So there's already the talk that they're going to bring in competition for Hurts. The only thing we don't know at this point, will there be a veteran? Will there be a draft pick? I still think it makes sense to have someone older since Jalen Hurts is so new to the game, but they're sitting there with the 6th overall pick. You never know who's going to be there. You have to be ready for the possibility that maybe you get somebody who becomes the guy that Carson Wentz was supposed to be.
Mike, the most sensible guy for the Philadelphia Eagles is Jacoby Brissett. I mean, basically you have the guy who's coached him daily in the last couple of years, obviously Nick Sirianni. And, he would come in knowing that, hey, look, the job absolutely belongs to Jalen Hurts, but you never know. And look, I totally agree with you. I do not put it past them. I will not be surprised if they draft a quarterback at number 6 overall. It's really interesting. And, I'm just starting this week to kind of dive into I know nothing about college football. I don't really follow it very closely. So I just get into it after the season. So I start listening to podcasts and then watching some stuff on YouTube, some highlights. And it amazes me that basically there is some consternation over how these top 4 quarterbacks are going to fall and whether Mac Jones belongs in that discussion at Alabama. So I really believe right now that you've got Todd McShay this week on their podcast at ESPN saying basically Zach Wilson is the no doubt number 2 to Trevor Lawrence. And, so we're going to have about, 2.5 more months of that to put up with, Mike. But in general, I think that Philadelphia, you definitely cannot count them out of a quarterback at number 6.
And Jacoby Brissett, I feel like, never got a full chance in Indianapolis. He was having a surprisingly good year, if I recall correctly, and there's a chance I don't. They were 5-2 at one point. He suffered a knee injury and then was never really the same guy after the MCL strain that knocked him out for a couple of games. And then he's just cast aside for Phillip Rivers. So that would be a guy who could make some sense to complement Jalen Hurts. And we really don't know much about Jalen Hurts. He started 4 games, got yanked from what could have been an exciting moment against a Washington team that may have knocked them out of playoff contention, would have knocked them out of playoff contention. You know, and the thing about a young quarterback, any quarterback, you need 4, 5, 6 games of film before you know what he's all about. There's a chance there's going to be a ceiling that Jalen Hurts hits in 2021, but he may not be able to bust through. We don't know enough about him at this point.
And the other thing you can't, I mean, how ironic it would be if it were Jacoby Brissett, but it'd be about 18 times more ironic if it was Nick Foles. And, you know, you really, Mike, no one knows what's going to happen to Nick Foles in Chicago. We're assuming that Mitchell Trubisky becomes, I don't know, deep in the back of my mind, I kind of think San Francisco, but I really don't know. Nobody knows. But I'm looking at Chicago as really tabula rasa, as an absolute blank slate when it comes to the quarterback position. You know, could they wait and draft somebody? Who knows? They're down in the draft at number 20. Would they be willing to trade up and really risk the future without the GM and coach knowing if they're really going to be there long term? That's why the run-up to this draft, I think, is going to be so much fun. Because even though we're getting a lot of answers at the quarterback position, it's almost like every answer creates a new question. Because you think, okay, Philadelphia, you know, Jalen Hurts now, okay. But they're probably going to add 2, if not more. So, and they got all the cap problems. So all of these things to me are very, very interesting when you look at both the short and long term of both the Philadelphia Eagles and the Indianapolis Colts.
You mentioned the Bears and the fact that the GM and the head coach there, Ryan Pace, Matt Nagy, respectively, under a certain amount of pressure to get this right. Howie Roseman, the GM in Philadelphia, is under pressure too. Doug Peterson's gone. Howie Roseman manages to survive. And now they've got this play where they decide to move on from Carson Wentz. And if Wentz plays extremely well for the Colts, do you think the people in Philadelphia are going to say, we understand why you traded him? If Wentz becomes the guy he was in 2017, they're going to be hearing it louder than ever that you idiots didn't see that this is the guy you should have kept. Right. And what are you doing with Jalen Hurts? And if we just would have rallied around Carson Wentz, he'd be our guy. Now we got to see him thrive in Indianapolis. So they got the double whammy here. They got to figure out their own deal at quarterback. They got to hope at some level that Wentz doesn't become MVP finalist. And above all else, they just got to win some football games. I've been saying this for weeks now. I think those Eagles fans, the worst thing that could have happened was them winning a Super Bowl because they are like addicted to it now and they want it. And if this team is in rebuilding mode, they're going to be even more pissed off than they were last year, Peter.
Mike, what is absolutely amazing is, and it's not that really utterly shocking necessarily, but think of how amazing it is that your team wins a Super Bowl 48 months ago. The head coach is gone. The quarterback is gone. The Super Bowl MVP, hero of the Super Bowl run, he's gone. He's gone. He's back. He's gone. And your offensive coordinator, he's gone. Your defensive coordinator, he's gone. Your best weapon for the quarterback, I would say, is likely gone, in Zach Ertz. And just think about this. Your big weapon in the running game, LeGarrette Blount, he's long gone, had a big Super Bowl. So all of these things just in the space of 4 years, your franchise is basically brand new. As a matter of fact, I was looking at it the other day, Mike. Think about this. The only huge player in that game, assuming Zach Ertz is gone, the only huge player in that game who's still there is Brandon Graham. He's the guy who got the strip sack on Brady, who basically ended the Patriots' last gasp in that game. It was really funny, by the way, just as a total aside. When I went on my training camp trip the next year, Brandon Graham has that video on his phone of him strip sacking Tom Brady, and he said, I watch it every day. And I bet he still does, by the way. But imagine Brandon Graham, who's not a superstar. He's a very good NFL player, but he's still there, and virtually everybody else who was valuable in that run is gone.
I'd have to do the research to come to a firm conclusion on it. I can't imagine a Super Bowl team that has fallen apart faster than the Eagles have.
I agree.
And they've just been absolutely dismantled. And it felt like it always feels like the Super Bowl winners got staying power. It always feels like it. But one thing led to another, and the Eagles, a far different team than they were. I'm going to skip forward to a question from Ricardo Hines on Twitter. We put out a call for mailbag questions. We're going to sprinkle a couple of them in now because they're relevant to the topic. Who was more responsible for Philly's run in 2017? Was it Frank Reich and his work with the quarterbacks, or was it Doug Pederson and his work as the head coach?
I think it was Doug Pederson because the buck stopped with Doug Pederson. Yes, the story I just told you and the story I wrote in a very 3,500 wordish way 8 days after that Super Bowl win over New England about the winning play. Frank Reich, Mike Groh, the receivers coach, and Doug Pederson. Basically, Mike Groh harvested this play. He brought it to Frank Reich, and Reich said, this is brilliant. We got to use it. So then they go to Doug Pederson. And remember, they still have to sell Doug Pederson. And so he says, yeah, I love this. This play was harvested, by the way, in Minneapolis once the Eagles got to their hotel, the Radisson, in Minneapolis. And so they didn't even put this play in, the winning play to Zach Ertz, until the week of the game. So what I'm saying is that the brain power of Frank Reich and his staff was great. But remember also, Doug Pederson is the guy who also has to say when Nick Foles comes to the sidelines and says, Philly, Philly, Doug Pederson's got to be the one who says, hey, let's run Philly special. And, the rest is history. But I guess what I'm saying, Mike, is in my opinion, especially with the guts that Doug Pederson had down the stretch, in so many ways, on so many play calls, I think you got to give the vote to Pederson.
I mentioned earlier that Adam Schefter said on 97 The Fanatic in Philly earlier today, too many Phillies, too many fanatics in that sentence to get it out properly, that Carson Wentz and Doug Pederson didn't speak for 8, 9, or 10 weeks. That's inconceivable to me. Not in the Princess Bride way, in the real way.
How in the world can this... It's inconceivable.
Inconceivable. How in the world can the starting quarterback and the head coach not speak for 8, 9, or 10 weeks? Now, Wentz was benched for the Final Four. I doubt there was a lot of conversation between Pederson and Wentz then. But I don't know. There has to be some hyperbole in it. I found a photo of Pederson and Wentz standing next to each other on the sideline at a game on November 30. I doubt they just chose to stand in the same place and not communicate. So I don't know if that meant beyond the games, beyond the locker room, beyond wherever. But regardless of where that set in, wherever that cold shoulder was happening, you can't have that in any functional workplace where two of the most important employees simply don't communicate. And how does that not stick to Doug Pederson? Remember, we heard all about emotional intelligence when Chip Kelly was fired and Doug Pederson was hired. There's not a lot of emotional intelligence rattling around a situation where you don't talk to the quarterback and the quarterback doesn't talk to you.
Mike, but I really think this has to go both ways. We have talked about this. I have written this. I'm sure we've talked about it sometime in the last month on the show. And that is that the stories going around internally in Philadelphia are A, Carson Wentz had become a very hard guy to coach. He did not take coaching well. B, he was angry that Jalen Hurts was drafted because he felt like it showed a lack of faith in him where, look, we could discuss this for 6 hours, and we're definitely not going to discuss it for more than 6 seconds. But essentially, Howie Roseman and this organization view the backup quarterback, with all of the flurry of activity at the quarterback position in the last 4 years, they view the backup quarterback as a top 10 most important position on our team. Why wouldn't you backstop it with somebody better than Nate Sudfeld? And I think thirdly, there comes a time when a guy is not receptive to coaching, when he gets bitter at sort of the little things. There comes a time where you know that he's mentally shut off. That's where he was. Now, I'll always be interested to know if when they interviewed Nick Sirianni and Josh McDaniels, one who got the job, one who didn't, at the end, I'd like to know, did they tell them we're trading this guy? Or did they tell them we're up in the air on this guy? Because honestly, don't you think that would have had a little something to do with the decision of one or both of those guys about taking the job? I mean, 4 years ago, Carson Wentz was a top 10, maybe top 5 NFL quarterback. And so this is all, this is going to be really interesting book writing about 5 or 10 years from now when we start to get the answers to some of these questions.
And Peter, I think Carson Wentz is not going to fare very well when the story is told. I'm trying to give the guy the benefit of the doubt because we don't know the story, but I hear the way you're saying it, and it meshes with what we've heard, and it's like, what has he done to deserve this attitude?
Absolutely.
What has he done to justify being entitled and needy and shattered by the fact that a second-round pick was spent on a quarterback? God forbid. Look at what it did to Tom Brady when they used a second-round pick on Jimmy Garoppolo. It propelled this second half of his career that has seen him win 4 more Super Bowls. Look at what it did to Aaron Rodgers when they drafted a quarterback in round 1. Maybe this was a test to see what they really had in Carson Wentz, and they found out that Wentz didn't pass it.
Look, we don't know all of these things. Carson Wentz has been a sphinx for the last couple of months, so we just don't know. But the story that is being told, basically, is that he thought that he was quite entitled. And it doesn't really ring right with the guy who, has always been an incredible worker bee and all that stuff. And that's why it's going to take a lot more reporting to find out everything that happened here. But to me, it just doesn't seem right. As Bucky Brooks has said from NFL.com, being a starting quarterback in the NFL is not a lifetime appointment. Carson Wentz felt it was.
And as I mentioned earlier, the fact that Frank Reich is in position to harvest the information and come to a reliable conclusion. He could write the story if he wanted to about a lot of the stuff that went on. He knows, he believes, he trusts that Carson Wentz is going to turn it back around. One last question before we move on to other topics. This is a question from our good friend A Red Zone Alk. Who's under more pressure in 2021, Rams GM Les Snead or Eagles GM Howie Roseman? Both guys shedding contracts that in hindsight they should not have entered into with top 2 quarterbacks from the 2016 draft.
Definitely Howie Roseman, because Howie Roseman made this deal. And obviously Les Snead made the deal in Los Angeles, but Sean McVay was the motor behind that trade. There's a lot more pressure, in my opinion, on Sean McVay than there is on Les Snead. And I don't believe he will fail, but if you go and make a huge trade and you get Matthew Stafford on your team and you are basically saying, okay, we're giving away 2 ones for this guy, I mean, he's got to work out. And it's Les Snead. Maybe he was a little too generous on the trade. We'll find out. But honestly, Mike, look at it. Who propelled that trade? Who made that trade to happen? That was not Les Snead. That was the head coach of that team. Whereas in Philadelphia, Nick Sirianni just got there 10 minutes ago. He's just a pawn in this. If they give him Carson Wentz, he's going to coach him. If they give him Jalen Hurts, he's going to coach him. So this is a Howie Roseman deal in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Les Snead has been with the Rams since 2012, largely as a table setter with the GM title, but it was Jeff Fisher that was in charge, and now it is, as a practical matter, Sean McVay who's in charge. Even though McVay is not the type of guy who's going to walk around and say, I'm in charge, the reality is he gets the players he wants. He wanted Stafford, and more importantly, he wanted Goff gone.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.